Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are going deep into something you might not expect to be so fascinating. EMFs in your home office. We're going to help you understand what they are, why they might matter to you, and most importantly, what you can do about them.
You know, it's interesting. Most people don't realize how many sources of EMFs they're surrounded by, especially in a space designed for work. And even more intriguing is the growing research on how these fields can affect our health and productivity.
Yeah, I recently read about a study where they found a link between prolonged EMF exposure and fatigue. That got me thinking, what about all the time we spend in our home offices? So let's break this down. What exactly are EMFs and how do they differ in a typical home office setup?
Good question. EMFs, or electromagnetic fields, are essentially areas of energy surrounding devices that use electricity.
Okay.
These fields are invisible, and they're generated by everything from your computer and Wi-Fi router to your desk lamp and even the wiring in your walls.
Okay, so EMFs are all around us, but I've also heard there are different types. Could you explain that a bit more?
Absolutely. EMFs are categorized into two main types: low frequency and radio frequency. Low frequency EMFs are emitted by things like power lines and appliances, while radio frequency EMFs come from wireless technologies like Wi-Fi, cell phones, and Bluetooth devices.
So in a home office, both types are at play, especially with all the wireless tech we use.
Exactly. And that's where it gets interesting. Each type interacts with the body differently, with different potential effects being studied. But what's consistent across research is this prolonged exposure to both low frequency and radio frequency EMFs may contribute to oxidative stress within our cells.
Oxidative stress. Now you're getting technical on me.
Think of it this way. Our cells are constantly fighting off damage from things like pollution and unhealthy foods. That's normal. But overexposure to EMFs may add to that burden, potentially leading to fatigue, inflammation, and even more serious health issues down the line. This is, of course, an area of ongoing research, but the precautionary principle suggests it's worth paying attention to.
That makes sense. It's like, why add extra stress to our bodies if we can minimize it right? But how do we even begin to tackle all these EMFs, especially with our reliance on things like Wi-Fi?
That's a valid concern. We're not suggesting you go off the grid entirely. But let's start with that Wi-Fi reliance. Studies have shown that a wired Ethernet connection significantly reduces your exposure compared to Wi-Fi.
You mean actually plugging my computer into the router with a cable?
Yeah,
I haven't done that in years.
it might seem old school, but think of it as a digital detox for your workspace. If you absolutely must use Wi-Fi, consider a router guard to reduce emissions and definitely disable your Wi-Fi at night. It's like giving your body a break from the constant barrage of radio frequency EMS.
Okay, that makes sense.
Here.
So switching to wired internet is a big one, but what about all those other wireless devices we're surrounded by? Keyboards, mice, headphones, printers. The list goes on.
You're hitting on a crucial point here. Every wireless device adds to your overall EMF exposure. It's a cumulative effect. So the more you can swap out for wired alternatives, the better. You'd be surprised how much of a difference it can make.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. But is it really as simple as swapping a few devices? What about the location of my workspace itself? Does that come into play?
Location is absolutely crucial. Remember, EMFs are areas of energy. The closer you are to the source, the stronger the field. So you want to avoid setting up shop near any major sources of EMFs.
Like what specifically?
Think circuit breaker panels, electrical outlets, and definitely any high voltage wiring. Appliances like refrigerators, microwaves, even your water heater, they all emit EMFs.
No. My desk is right next to a power outlet, and my office shares a wall with the laundry room where the washer and dryer are constantly running. Is that bad?
It's all about minimizing your proximity. Even a few feet of distance can significantly reduce your exposure. Can you rearrange your desk to be further from the outlet? Maybe try working in a different room when the laundry is running. Every bit helps.
Okay, that's doable. But besides rearranging furniture, are there ways to actually shield my workspace from those invisible waves? I've seen EMF blocking paint advertised. Does that stuff actually work?
There's actually some science to support EMF shielding materials. You can find EMF shielding paint, curtains, and even laptop shields. But I'm curious, do you feel like you need that level of protection? What are your biggest concerns with EMFs?
Well, if I'm being honest, I worry about the long-term effects. I spend hours at my desk every day. It's like, even if the risks aren't fully understood yet, shouldn't I take steps to protect myself?
That's a thoughtful approach, and it sounds like shielding materials could offer you some peace of mind. But there are other strategies we haven't discussed yet, things that may address your concerns more holistically. For example, have you ever heard of vampire energy?
You mean like the energy devices drain even when they're turned off? Is that a real thing or an urban legend?
It's definitely real. Leaving electronics in standby mode means they're still emitting EMFs and contributing to your exposure.
So I should unplug everything when I'm not using it.
It's the most effective way to cut off that energy flow. It might sound like a hassle, but think of it as a ritual. Unplugging at the end of your workday signals to your body and mind that it's time to disconnect and recharge.
I like that. It's like a digital detox for my workspace.
Exactly. Small changes can make a big difference.
Okay, so we've talked about minimizing Wi-Fi, swapping to wired devices, rearranging our workspace, and unplugging devices completely. But what about our computer setup itself? I spend hours hunched over my laptop. I can't help but wonder if that's adding to my EMF exposure.
You're right to be thinking about that. Your computer setup plays a big role in your overall exposure, and hunching over a laptop all day isn't doing your posture or your EMF exposure any favors. Let's break down how you can optimize your setup to be both ergonomic and EMF friendly.
Perfect. I'm all ears.
The first thing I always recommend is investing in an external keyboard and mouse. This allows you to maintain a safe distance from your laptop's emissions. Think about it. If the energy field is strongest at the source, increasing the distance between you and the source is a simple way to reduce exposure.
Okay, that's easy enough. I already have a wireless keyboard and mouse. Should I switch to wired versions of those two?
That's definitely something to consider, especially if you're aiming for a truly low EMF setup. But let's focus on your laptop for a moment. Where do you usually have it positioned while you're working?
Usually right on my desk directly in front of me. Sometimes I even prop it up on my lap if I'm working from the couch.
That's a common practice, but it also means you're in very close proximity to the source of those EMFs. Ideally, your monitor should be at least 20 inches away from your body, and if you're using a desktop position, the CPU tower at least 3 feet away from your chair.
Wow. I'm definitely guilty of having my laptop way too close. I had no idea the distance mattered that much.
What about if I use a laptop stand to elevate it? Does that help? A laptop stand can definitely help with ergonomics, but it doesn't necessarily reduce your EMF exposure. Remember, the emissions are coming from the laptop itself, not just the screen.
So external keyboard and mouse, proper monitor distance. What else should I keep in mind?
Here's something most people overlook. The power adapter. That little brick plugged into the wall emits its own EMFs. Try to position it as far away from your body as possible, ideally at least 3 feet.
Okay, this is starting to feel like a game of EMF Tetris. But seriously, I appreciate these practical tips. It's all about making those small adjustments right.
Exactly. It's not about creating a sterile, tech-free bubble. It's about being mindful of where those EMFs are coming from and finding ways to minimize your exposure without sacrificing functionality. But speaking of things we tend to keep close by, let's talk about cell phones.
Oh boy. I'm definitely guilty of having my phone glued to my hand most of the day.
I think we all are. But cell phones are a significant source of radio frequency EMFs, so it's worth considering how we can minimize their impact.
Okay, give it to me straight. What's the best way to handle my phone while working?
The simplest thing you can do is put your phone in airplane mode whenever you can. This significantly reduces the amount of radiation it emits. And while we're on the topic of cell phone habits, let's talk about those wireless earbuds.
Oh no, not my AirPods. I love listening to music while I work. Are those bad too?
Like any wireless device, they contribute to your overall EMF exposure. If you're trying to minimize your exposure, try switching to wired earphones.
Ugh, okay, wired earphones it is. But doesn't that defeat the purpose of having a wireless office setup? I feel like I'm going back in time.
It's all about finding a balance that works for you. You don't have to go completely wired, but even small changes can make a difference. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate EMFs entirely. They're a part of our modern world. It's about reducing your exposure in a way that feels manageable and sustainable.
I hear ya. Baby steps, right? But besides ditching the AirPods, what else can I do about my phone? I can't exactly switch to a wired version of that.
You can, however, be mindful of where you place it. Try not to keep your phone directly on your desk. Even a small distance helps, and if you're really concerned, consider an EMF protection case.
I've seen those advertised. Do they actually work?
The effectiveness of EMF protection cases is still under debate, but some studies suggest they can help reduce the amount of radiation that reaches your body. It's worth looking into if you're looking for extra protection.
Okay, I'll add that to my list. You know, before we started this deep dive, I read an article about grounding your workspace to minimize EMF buildup. What exactly is grounding, and does it really make a difference?
Grounding is a fascinating concept, and it's becoming increasingly popular as people become more aware of EMFs. Essentially, it means connecting your body to the Earth's natural electrical charge.
So it's like sending those excess EMFs back down to the earth where they belong.
In a way, yes, it's about reestablishing a natural electrical equilibrium.
How do you actually DO that in a home office setting?
There are a few ways. You can use grounding mats for your desk or under your feet while you work. You can also make sure all your equipment is properly grounded through a three-pronged outlet. And the simplest, most accessible way to ground yourself is to go outside.
Wait, going outside can help with EMFs.
Absolutely. Walking barefoot on grass, sand, or even dirt allows your body to naturally discharge any excess electrical buildup. It's a simple yet incredibly effective way to harmonize your body's electrical field.
I love that. It's like a nature reset button.
Exactly. And it highlights the importance of incorporating nature into our workspaces.
Speaking of nature, I'm a huge plant enthusiast. I read that certain plants can absorb EMF radiation. Is there any truth to that, or is it just wishful thinking?
It's not just wishful thinking. Studies have shown that certain plants like cacti, aloe vera, and snake plants can actually absorb and reduce EMF radiation.
No way. I have a snake plant in my office right now. It's like my little EMF guardian.
Yeah.
So besides their aesthetic appeal, plants can actually contribute to a healthier electromagnetic environment.
Absolutely. And in general, opting for natural materials like wood and natural fabrics over synthetic materials can help create a more balanced electromagnetic environment.
Okay, this is all starting to make sense. It's not just about blocking EMFs. It's about surrounding ourselves with things that have a more natural grounding energy. But before we go full-on hippie on our listeners, let's not forget that we're still in the digital age. We can't easily ditch our computers and smartphones entirely.
You're right. It's about finding a balance, and that's where healthy habits come in. No amount of EMF reduction can replace the benefits of taking care of your overall well-being.
So what are your top tips for a healthy work routine, even in a world filled with the EMFs?
First and foremost, make sure you're taking frequent breaks from your screen. This not only reduces eye strain, but it also gives your body a chance to recover from EMF exposure.
I'm definitely guilty of getting sucked into the screen vortex. I need to set some reminders to step away and stretch.
Even 5 minutes every hour can make a big difference, and whenever possible, get outside for some fresh air and natural sunlight. It's amazing how rejuvenating it can be. Plus, remember, direct contact with the earth is a powerful way to ground yourself.
I couldn't agree more. I always feel so much more energized after a walk in the park.
And don't underestimate the power of hydration. Keep a water bottle handy and sip on it throughout the day. And to combat oxidative stress from all those electronics, load up on antioxidant-rich foods like berries, nuts, and leafy greens.
Okay, those are all great tips. I'm feeling motivated to create a workspace that nourishes both my body and mind. But all this talk about healthy habits and natural remedies makes me wonder, are there any misconceptions about EMFs that we should clear up? I mean, there's a lot of information out there, and it's not always easy to separate fact from fiction.
That's a great point. You're right, there's a lot of misinformation circulating, and it can be tough to know what to believe.
Look, I've seen those ads for EMF blocking stickers you put on your phone. Do those things actually work?
Unfortunately, those types of products are often more about marketing than actual science. There's no credible evidence to suggest that a sticker can magically block EMF radiation.
Okay, so let's stick to the science-backed solutions. We've covered a lot of ground already, from dishing Wi-Fi to grounding our workspaces, but I'm always curious to learn more. Are there any cutting-edge technologies or strategies on the horizon for EMF reduction?
There's definitely a lot of exciting research happening in this field. One area that's particularly interesting is the development of EMF shielding fabrics that can be incorporated into clothing and furniture.
EMF blocking clothes. That sounds like something straight out of a superhero movie.
I know, right? Imagine wearing a shirt that can deflect those pesky EMFs.
But seriously, that could be a game changer for people who are particularly sensitive to EMF exposure.
Exactly. And another promising area is the use of bioharmonizing technologies, which aim to create a more harmonious electromagnetic environment by emitting beneficial frequencies.
Bioharmonizing technologies. That sounds fascinating. Can you elaborate on that?
These technologies are still in their early stages, but the idea is to counteract the potentially harmful effects of EMFs with frequencies that resonate with our body's natural rhythms. Think of it this way. Our bodies emit their own subtle electromagnetic frequencies. These bioharmonizing technologies aim to introduce frequencies that complement and support our natural biofield, potentially mitigating the disruptive effects of external EMFs.
So it's kind of like retuning our body's energy to be more in sync with our surroundings.
And in essence, yes. It's a fascinating area of exploration, and I'm excited to see how it develops in the coming years.
Me too. This is all so intriguing. It
Yeah.
feels like we're just scratching the surface of this whole EMF world.
We are, and the more we learn about EMFs, the more we realize how interconnected our physical and digital well-being truly are. It's not about feeling technology, but about understanding its impact and making choices that support our overall health.
Okay, so we've talked about the science, the solutions, and even the future of EMF reduction. But let's bring it back to our listener. What's the one key takeaway you want them to walk away with from this deep dive?
The most important thing is awareness. Simply being aware of the potential impact of EMFs empowers us to make conscious choices about how we interact with technology. It's about taking back control of our digital well-being and creating spaces where we can thrive both physically and mentally.
I love that. It's not about being afraid of technology. It's about using it wisely and creating a healthy balance in our lives.
Exactly. We have the power to design our environments and our habits to support our well-being even in a digital age.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about and act on. But before we wrap up part one of this deep dive, I have one final question for you, a resident EMF expert.
I'm all ears.
If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about the way we design our workspaces, what would it be?
That's a fantastic question. If I had a magic wand, I would infuse every workspace with elements of nature. I'd bring in plants, natural light, and materials that connect us to the Earth's energy. Imagine workspaces designed to harmonize with our natural rhythms, not disrupt them.
That's a beautiful vision. I can just imagine working in a space that feels both grounding and inspiring.
It's about creating a workspace that nourishes our souls as much as our minds.
Well said. On that note, we're going to wrap up part one of our deep dive into creating a low EMF home office. Join us for part two, where we'll continue exploring ways to create a workspace that supports your well-being on every level.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We're in the midst of exploring how to create a low EMF home office, and in this part, I think it's time we address something crucial: the psychology of all this.
Oh, interesting. What do you mean by the psychology of EMFs?
Well, think about it. We're talking about invisible forces, potential health risks that are still being studied, and making changes to our environment and habits. That can bring up a lot of feelings, right?
Yeah, I can see that. Some people might feel anxious or overwhelmed, while others might be skeptical or even dismissive.
Exactly. And it's important to acknowledge those feelings. It's not about shaming anyone for their response or pushing a specific agenda. This is about empowering people with knowledge so they can make informed choices for themselves.
I like that. It's about giving people agency, not adding to their stress. So how can we approach this topic in a way that feels empowering rather than overwhelming?
One thing we can do is focus on the practical, actionable steps people can take, even if they're starting small. Remember, even small changes can have a cumulative effect.
Right. It's not about achieving EMF-free perfection overnight. It's about making gradual shifts that feel sustainable in the long run.
Exactly. And it's also important to emphasize that reducing EMF exposure is just one piece of the wellness puzzle. It's not a magic bullet, but it can be a valuable tool for creating a healthier and more balanced life.
So it's about integrating these strategies into a holistic approach to well-being rather than seeing them as isolated solutions.
Precisely. And that brings us to another important point: self-care. When we're talking about potential health risks, it's easy to get caught up in fear or anxiety. That's why it's essential to prioritize self-care practices that help us manage stress and cultivate a sense of well-being.
That makes sense. If we're constantly bombarded with information about potential threats, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. So what are some self-care practices that can help us navigate this space in a healthy way?
Well, mindfulness practices like meditation and deep breathing can be incredibly helpful for managing stress and cultivating a sense of calm. Spending time in nature, which, as we've already discussed, can also help with grounding, is another powerful way to reconnect with ourselves and the world around us. And of course, prioritizing things like sleep, healthy eating, and exercise is crucial for overall well-being, both physical and mental.
Those are great reminders. It's so easy to get caught up in trying to control the external environment that we forget about the importance of nurturing our inner landscape.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. And speaking of balance, one thing I've noticed is that people often approach EMF reduction with an all or nothing mindset.
Well, I see what you mean. It's
Yeah.
like either they're going to completely overhaul their entire home and lifestyle, or they're going to dismiss the whole thing as too complicated.
Right. And that's where the psychology comes in again. We need to encourage a more nuanced and flexible approach. There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to EMFs. What works for one person might not work for another. It's about finding what feels right for you, your individual sensitivity, and your lifestyle.
I love that. It's about giving ourselves permission to experiment, to find what resonates with us, and to make adjustments along the way.
Exactly. And it's okay to start small. Maybe you start by simply unplugging your Wi-Fi router at night.
Yeah.
Or maybe you swap out your wireless mouse for a wired one. Every little step you take is a step in the right direction.
And it's about celebrating those wins, no matter how small they may seem.
Absolutely. It's about acknowledging your efforts and recognizing that you're taking control of your health and well-being, and that's something to be proud of.
You know, this conversation is really shifting my perspective. I'm starting to see EMF reduction less as a set of rigid rules and more as a journey of self-discovery. It's about tuning into our bodies, understanding how our environment affects us, and making conscious choices that support our well-being.
I'm so glad to hear that. It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge and taking ownership of our health.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about practical tips for reducing EMF exposure in our home offices, explored the psychological aspects of navigating this complex topic, and emphasized the importance of self-care and finding a balanced approach that works for us individually. What else can we offer our listeners as they embark on their own low EMF journeys?
One thing I'd like to add is that it's helpful to view this process as an ongoing experiment. Pay attention to how you feel as you make changes to your environment and habits. Notice any shifts in your energy levels, sleep patterns, or overall sense of well-being. Your body will give you clues as to what's working and what might need adjustment.
That's such valuable advice. It's about becoming more attuned to our own internal signals and using that feedback to guide our choices.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to reach out for support. There are amazing resources available, books, websites, communities dedicated to EMF awareness and reduction. Connecting with others who are on a similar journey can offer encouragement, inspiration, and practical tips.
I love that. It's a reminder that we're not alone in this. We can learn from each other's experiences and support each other along the way. But, speaking of learning and exploration, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I have one final question for you.
I'm intrigued. What is it?
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the potential risks of EMFs, but are there any potential benefits or upsides to engaging in this process of EMF reduction?
That's a brilliant question. And, I think there are several potential benefits that go beyond simply reducing our exposure to potentially harmful electromagnetic fields. First and foremost, this process invites us to become more mindful of our relationship with technology. It encourages us to question our habits, set boundaries, and make more conscious choices about how and when we engage with our devices. That in itself can be incredibly empowering.
That's a great point. It's not about demonizing technology. It's about taking back control and using it in a way that serves us rather than the other way around.
Exactly. And beyond that, I think this journey can foster a deeper connection to ourselves and the natural world. As we become more attuned to our body's subtle energy, we may find ourselves gravitating towards practices that support our overall well-being. Things like spending time in nature, eating nourishing foods, and cultivating a sense of inner peace.
I love that. It's like in the process of reducing our exposure to one type of energy, we open ourselves up to a whole new world of possibilities for healing, growth, and connection.
Precisely. It's about creating a life that feels aligned and vibrant on every level: physical, mental, emotional, and even spiritual.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end this part of our deep dive on. We've explored practical strategies, delved into the psychology of EMF reduction, and even glimpsed the potential benefits that lie beyond the realm of simply mitigating risks. But there's one more piece of this puzzle we haven't explored yet, a piece that's often overlooked but incredibly important:
Oh, and what's that?
the power of intention. Join us for the final part of this deep dive as we explore how our thoughts, beliefs, and intentions can shape our experience of EMFs and create a truly harmonious and supportive workspace. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been exploring how to create a low EMF home office, and now we're going to delve into something a bit more subtle, but potentially very powerful: the role of intention.
It's fascinating how often we overlook the power of our own minds when it comes to health and well-being.
Right. We're so focused on external factors. But what about our internal landscape? What role does our mindset play in all of this?
Well, think about it this way. Everything is energy, right? Our thoughts, our emotions, our beliefs, they all have an energetic frequency. and those frequencies interact with the energy fields around us, including EMFs.
So are you saying that our thoughts can actually influence how we experience EMS?
I believe so, yes. There's a growing body of research exploring the connection between our thoughts, our emotions, and our physical health. And while the science is still emerging, ancient wisdom traditions have long recognized the power of the mind to shape our reality.
That's really interesting, but how does this apply to EMF specifically? I mean, it's not like we can just think our way out of EMS exposure.
We can't simply wish EMFs away, but I do believe that our mindset can influence how we perceive and respond to them. If we're approaching this topic from a place of fear and anxiety, we're likely to be more sensitive to any potential effects, even if they're subtle.
That makes sense. Our thoughts and emotions can definitely amplify our physical sensations.
Exactly. But if we approach this from a place of empowerment and curiosity, if we focus on creating a supportive and harmonious environment, we may find that we're less affected by EMFs, or that we're able to mitigate their impact more effectively.
So it's about shifting our perspective from fear to empowerment, from feeling like a victim to feeling like we have some agency in this situation.
Precisely. And that's where intention comes in. Intention is a powerful force. It's about setting a clear and conscious direction for our energy, our thoughts, and our actions.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all connects, but I have to admit I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to this kind of stuff. Can you give me a concrete example of how intention might play out in a low EMF home office?
Sure. Imagine you're setting up your workspace. You've taken all the practical steps we've discussed. You've minimized Wi-Fi, swapped to wired devices, rearranged your furniture, and so on. But now, instead of just focusing on the physical aspects, you also take a moment to set an intention for this space.
What kind of intention?
It could be something like, I create a workspace that supports my health, my creativity, and my well-being. Or, this space is a sanctuary of peace and productivity.
Okay, so it's like infusing the space with a positive and supportive energy.
Exactly. And you can take it a step further. As you work, you can periodically bring your awareness to your intention. You can visualize yourself surrounded by a protective bubble of energy, or you can simply affirm to yourself, I am safe, I am healthy, I am thriving.
I have to admit this is starting to sound a bit woo-woo even for me,
Yep.
but I'm open to exploring it. Is there any scientific evidence to support the power of intention?
There's a growing body of research in the field of quantum physics that suggests our thoughts and intentions can actually influence matter. It's fascinating stuff, but it's also still very much on the cutting edge of science.
Right. It's like we're just beginning to understand the true power of our minds.
We are, and I think that's incredibly exciting. But even if we set aside the science for a moment, I think we can all relate to the power of intention on a personal level. Have you ever noticed how your mindset can affect your experience of a situation?
Absolutely. If I'm going into something with a negative attitude, it almost always turns out badly. But if I approach it with a positive outlook, things tend to go more smoothly.
That's the power of intention in action, and I believe it applies to EMFs as well. If we approach this topic from a place of fear and resistance, we're likely to amplify any potential negative effects. But if we come from a place of empowerment and intention, we can create a more supportive and harmonious experience for ourselves.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But let's bring it back to practical applications. What are some specific things our listeners can do to work with intention in their low EMF home offices?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, setting a clear intention for your workspace is a great place to start. Take some time to reflect on what you want to create in this space. Do you want it to be a sanctuary of peace and focus, a hub of creativity and inspiration, a place where you feel energized and productive? Once you've identified your intention, write it down and place it somewhere visible in your workspace.
So it's like a reminder, a visual anchor for our intention.
Exactly. And each time you sit down to work, take a moment to connect with your intention. Visualize it, feel it, embody it. You can even say it out loud as an affirmation.
Okay, that makes sense. But what if our minds start to wander? What if doubts or anxieties creep in?
That's completely normal. Our minds are naturally prone to distraction. The key is to gently redirect your focus back to your intention. You can use a simple phrase like, I return to my intention. Or you can take a few deep breaths and visualize yourself surrounded by a protective bubble of energy.
So it's about cultivating a sense of awareness and gently guiding our minds back to our chosen focus.
Exactly, and remember, this is a practice. It takes time and patience to train our minds to stay present and align with our intentions. But the more we practice, the easier it becomes.
This has been such a fascinating exploration of the power of intention. I have to admit, I was a bit skeptical at first, but you've given me a lot to think about.
I'm glad to hear that. I believe that as we become more aware of the interconnectedness of our minds, our bodies, and our environment, we unlock incredible potential for healing and transformation.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to bring this deep dive to a close. We've covered a lot of ground, from the science of EMFs to practical tips for reduction to the importance of self-care, and now, the power of intention. What are your final thoughts for our listeners as they embark on their own low EMF journeys?
My final thought is this: trust your intuition. We all have an inner wisdom that guides us. As you explore this topic and make changes in your life, pay attention to how you feel, what resonates with you, what feels empowering, what brings you a sense of peace and well-being. Trust those inner nudges and allow them to guide you.
That's beautiful advice. It's about reclaiming our power, tuning into our own inner compass, and creating a life that feels authentic and aligned.
Exactly. And remember, this is a journey, not a destination. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It's about finding what works for you and enjoying the process of discovery.
Well said. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights with us today. It's been an honor to have you on the deep dive.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into creating a low EMF home office. We hope you found it informative, inspiring, and empowering. Remember, even small changes can make a big difference. Start where you are, trust your intuition, and create a workspace that supports your well-being on every level. Until next time, keep diving deep.